Can you remember the last time you felt like you really improved in your drawing? If not, it might be because you haven't been writing down what made you achieve this new milestone. Often, new milestones or achievements happen because of the things we started doing weeks or even months prior to achieving them. This is true for anything like business, athleticism, and yes, also in art. And in today's video, I'm going to give you 5 of my milestone moments that made me really improve as an artist. So we're going to get right into it. The first one is think slow, commit fast. And what I mean by this is that you have to embrace the things you're going to put down on paper, and you have to first analyze before you draw. But when you start drawing, you commit to the line. Even though the line doesn't come out as you want it to be, you commit to it. So a good example of this is when I have like these little studies that I have in my sketchbook here. These are like mask studies, and some of them are a bit from invention and some are not. And basically, when I do a study, I will look at it, I will look at the subject matter, and I will try to analyze it as best as I can, break it down into simple forms, yada yada, try to look at the design itself, and also try to look at what I will extract from it and leave everything else out. And once I've done that, I haven't drawn anything yet, but once I go to draw, I commit to the lines that I want to draw, even if they're not as good as I want them to be, and then I continue. And again, I commit to a line and I continue again. And so even if I make mistakes or I overlap, I don't try to correct them. I just try to work with them. And I think it's one of the strengths from amazing artists like Kim Young-gi, for instance, is that it's not that they did not make mistakes, is that they worked with the mistakes that they were making. And I think that's a huge difference between a beginner and an advanced experienced artist. And it's not only about art, even it's like in any endeavor, is like we are not immune to making mistakes, but it's how we deal with those mistakes. And that is the power of being able to, stay calm and focused almost and not get hyped up or even riled up in the fact that you're making mistakes. It's more about I'm committing to something and I'm trying to work with that and try to make it the best version of what it can be right now with my skill sets. So I'll continue to commit to lines and then see where I can go from there. Right? So that's the first thing, is that you think slow, commit fast, and you embrace the thing you put down on paper. And then number two, related to that, is to do more studies. I often find that, and this was for me personally, when I was having some trouble drawing something for today or just coming up with something that I wanted to draw, I always just reverted back to studies. And every time I reverted back to studies, I always had better results. And I always sort of got my creative juices flowing again, as they would say. So I would really advise you to commit to doing more studies. It's never a waste of time. It's always a good thing to do. And it always sort of inspires you to draw the next thing that you want to draw. And sometimes what I would even say here is, of course, you're going to do studies that are within your subject matter of interest, but I wouldn't overanalyze what you're going to study. And what I mean by this is because when you start overanalyzing what you want to study, you're actually overanalyzing what you want to end up drawing that is not the study, right? So if you're like, "Oh, I really want to draw a character and it needs to be this like druid character, it needs to be like an elf druid character," and then you decide to do studies, you're going to really bias your way into something that is, fantasy druid like, um, either armor or clothing or elf like or cosplay that is sort of manipulating your judgment into what studies you're going to do. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes it's a limiting thing. And I would say that if you're going to do studies, just do studies for the sake of studies. So keep it maybe within the realm of fantasy or medieval or whatever you want to do, but keep it widely open for interpretation. And then just do the first things you find on whatever, Pinterest or Google, and just start studying those, because that will more likely inspire you to maybe do something more original than you were intending to do. So I often think like doing more sporadic studies has really helped me with staying creative and not getting stagnant in what I end up drawing all the time. Number three is a bit tricky and it will push a lot of people outside of their comfort zone, but it's to start a drawing where you normally wouldn't. Now, I have learned this from the best of the best, and this is people like Kim Young-gi, an artist I really look up to. So what I mean by this is that what they will often do, and what I often saw them do, is that they started a drawing randomly and then went from there. And so what I mean by this, and my friend Rembert Montald, I saw him do this as well, is, for instance, oftentimes Rembert will start drawing a character from the feet up, which, if you're not very confident with the proportions of a figure, that can be an absolute nightmare for a lot of people. But I also think it's a fantastic way to start a drawing. And the reason for that is because it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. Because if given the choice, everyone would always start with, drawing a head with the neck and then going into, the body. And I think that oftentimes is a very limiting factor for us as well. Whereas, let's say, start with an arm, maybe it's also already like a clothed arm, like a drapery kind of arm, and there's some form of drapery going on, and that is what you start drawing, and then you start drawing the wrist coming out outside of that, like this, and you start drawing, the hand coming outside like this, and then from there you start sort of imagining, okay, based on what I've drawn here, now where do I take it from here? Because I'm still open to a lot of an interpretation. Like I could start drawing the collar of my character sort of here, like this, and then based out of that I can sort of draw the first part of the neck. This is like a very Kim Young-gi approach to drawing, but the reason I really like it and enjoy it is because it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And I think sometimes as artists, we tend to get into a sort of, like, literally a comfort zone where we always have the exact same process. And part of being creative is letting go of that exact thing, is letting go of the process we are so used to. And so, right, I'm not going to finish this completely, but you can see that because of this, we might end up with something that we normally wouldn't end up with, simply because we started in a position where we normally wouldn't start a drawing. And I think that really has helped me a ton in just mixing up how I do studies. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be something that you make up or that you do from imagination. You can very much do this not from imagination. You can try and just do a study based on an artwork that already exists. Like, these studies I did from Kim Young-gi, but you can start them in a place where Kim Young-gi didn't start them, right? You can start them somewhere else. So what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to freshen it up. You're trying to start a drawing in a new place and then see how you can muster your way through it and come up with something that looks like what you wanted to draw anyway. Like, let's say you wanted to draw a character, start with, like I said, like with the sleeve, or start with just drawing the pants and then see how you can work your way up. And the reason you want to do this is because you want to sometimes, it's the same with physical training, is you want to sometimes, or you, a lot of the times they call it progressive overload, is you want to shock the system a little bit. And with your brain, it's the exact same thing. You want to challenge your brain. And the way that you can do that is by starting and drawing in a completely random place and then seeing how you can still make it work, because it will really, really help you, one, to get more creative, and two, to also really train your proportions a lot better with the things that you want to learn how to draw. And then number four is to copy the art, change the medium. I absolutely love this. And I've done this a lot, not only traditionally in my sketchbook, also with digital art, is that I will look at, in this case, like a famous master painting. So these are Dean Cornwell studies, but these are actual paintings. Like the Dean Cornwell versions of this are actually painted with either acrylic or oil. And what I'm doing is I'm copying the artist, but I'm changing the medium. And what this naturally facilitates is you don't have the luxury to actually copy the artist stroke for stroke. You are forced to emulate the artist, which is what we strive to do, or should strive to do. Is we want to emulate an artist. We want to get inside of their head, so to speak, and try to understand what fundamentals they used in order to achieve the result they got. But we don't want to copy them stroke for stroke or line for line, because then we run into the risk of just mindlessly copying. And when we mindlessly copy, we achieve nothing. However, when you start to change the medium, when you use a different medium to emulate an artist, you are forced in that methodology. And it is something that has really helped me elevate my art and elevate my drawing and painting, is by looking at a famous artist and then trying to really emulate their paintings using a completely different medium. Because what I have to think now is, when I was copying Dean Cornwell, is I had to consider the values, I had to consider the proportions of the character, I had to consider the composition, how he was using composition to his favor, but I had to translate it into a different medium, which instantly made it more interesting on how I would think about drawing and painting in general. Because I started to realize, in this case with Dean Cornwell, is like what areas he was putting an emphasis on value. And it helped me understand where he would push shapes, where he would push value, where he would leave things sort of more blurry or more unfocused. And all of these things I started to notice now much better, because I was using a different medium. I couldn't mindlessly copy what I saw in the painting. So that is by far, if I can recommend one of these five, that's the one that I would for sure recommend that you do it, because it's so valuable. And then number five is that imagination is messy. So fail a lot and fail forward and be messy. I cannot stress this enough. When you want to draw from imagination, which is completely different from doing studies from masters or just doing studies yourself, is going to a place where you can not be messy and draw from imagination, is essentially a Kim Young-gi level, right? It's a very high level of understanding how to draw and then draw from imagination, which is not, it's not like it's not attainable. It definitely is, but it's more of a party trick. Kim Young-gi did a ton of studies before he actually went into drawing from imagination. But if you want to draw from imagination with sort of a peace of mind, then be messy. Make messy drawings. Explore, explore a lot, and have the liberty and give yourself permission to fail. And that failure is definitely going to help you to then draw what you want to end up drawing from imagination. But I often feel like we are stuck in sort of this expectation that we need to end up with this for today. So we're going to start with this for today. And that shouldn't be the case. You should first allow yourself to just be incredibly messy and start exploring and warming up your creative juices, warming up that creative flow. And that only happens by being messy and relaxing your mind. And people think this is sort of like a meditation, and to some degree it is, but what relaxing your mind for me is it's getting rid of the expectation of making something that needs to look good. And when we start deliberately being messy and failing, we get rid of that. And then because of that, our mind relaxes. And ironically, we become more creative and we can make things that we want to make. And I think that's something that has helped me really become more creative and help me s- continue sketching. And I think that's the most important part is like you want to be consistent because the only like absolute golden rule is that consistency will make you better. So even if you do all five of these in one day, you're not going to be that much better at drawing, right? You need to do it consistently. But these five things, if you keep up consistent drawing and you sporadically, put these five concepts or these five tips into your drawing routine, it can really like give you a nice boost in your drawing level. And that's something I've noticed in my drawing journey is every time I had this sort of moment where I was super proud of what I made or what I was able to make and felt like I leveled up a little bit, I always backtracked it and looked at what I've done the weeks prior or even months prior of like have I started doing consistently. And sometimes it was, doing studies or trying to emulate a master with a different medium, or again, like I said, make it interesting and just start a drawing from a place where I would never start it, or just be incredibly messy and exploratory when I wanted to create something. And all of these things have really, really contributed in making me more proficient at drawing. So that's it. Those are the five tips that I would definitely recommend that you start to incorporate into your drawing practice as well. As always, I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.